Hi besties. Today I want to talk about one of my favorite series that I read as a kid that I'm rereading now, or that I just reread, and kind of the importance that it held for me and that it still holds for me, the way that it shaped me, and then I want to also kind of tie that into a conversation about middle grade fantasy. It's really important to have middle grade fantasy and how we shouldn't try and make it something different. So these books, two of my friends got me into them when I wish I could remember the age, somewhere between 10 and 13, I guess. I just devoured them. My two friends had already read these books, and when I saw them, I was like, those look a little bit cringe for me based on the cover pictures. We'll get into that later. But they were like, just give it a chance. And those words changed my life. This series, like, I think about it so often. I'm so happy to reread it. I wish to you and to every person that I love that you've had that experience when you were a kid of reading a book that just changed you. Just reading a book that, like, it was everything. You know, the way that you read books when you were a teenager, a young teenager. That's what these books were for me. I'm going to go into the plot of these later, but to talk a little bit about middle grade fantasy. It's not very big today as far as publishing and what people are reading. Middle grade fantasy is not up there. It's all about young adult, new adult, romance, fantasy, and romantasy. There's not a lot of other stuff being talked about, maybe thrillers, maybe, but other than that, I mean, that's pretty much it. That's what's really big. And there's a lot of people reading, which is so great. But it's hard to get online and recommend books to kids, you know. I don't even really want kids online, so I don't want to be recommending books to them. And the majority of the middle grade fantasy that I talk about is a little bit on the younger side. There are a lot of really popular middle grade fantasy books that you've read and that you've heard of. The Narnia books, the first Harry Potter, A Wrinkle in Time, Percy Jackson, The Phantom Tollbooth, Coraline. These are all really popular middle grade fantasy books. But those are the kind of books that appeal to a really huge audience. They're kind of simple, they're very well written, and they have stood the test. Most of those have really stood the test of time. I would consider both this series and the Worst Witch series. The Worst Witch series, I would put it like, you could read that at, 8 or 9. This, I would say, would interest a kid at 10 to 12. Whereas those other ones that I mentioned would be 10 to forever. But I love and I'm very passionate about middle grade fantasy. It's what got me reading, and I want it to be a big part of my kids' lives too. I want to talk to people who want to, heal their inner child and go back and read some of those amazing books that they read when they were a kid, plus some, and then also to people who have kids that are this age now or will have kids that will be the age to read these books. I don't have kids that are old enough to read yet, but I really want to cultivate an environment where they start reading and enjoy reading. In my house, it was not my siblings or my parents who got me to start reading. There was a lot of, sorry to my siblings if you're watching this, elitism surrounding reading in my house growing up. And I don't know if my other siblings struggled with reading, literally reading like I did, but I really struggled with it. It was very hard for me to start reading. So getting into Harry Potter was big for me, but those books were too hard for me to read. They were too big. They were too difficult. It's important that it be a little bit more fast-paced and a little bit easier to digest. There wasn't a lot of room for children's fantasy that mostly just appeals to children in my household growing up. And I don't think that it's the fault of anyone. So when it came to reading when I was that age, it was these kind of classics. Narnia, The Hobbit, which I struggle to call that children's. That's like, that can be a pretty difficult book. I found these things out from my friends, and it was like all because of my friends that this even happened, which is normal. I mean, that's not weird. But I worry that if somebody doesn't have friends who are readers, that it won't ever happen. If it's not cultivated at home, it may never occur. And it's much harder, as many of you know who've done it, it's much harder to get into reading when you're getting into it as an adult for the first time. So I want to have all these books. I want to have good ones that I only like when I was a kid. I want to have stupid ones. I want to have fun ones. I want to have, you know, like books that my parents would have never, like Diary of a Wimpy Kid. So all that to say, I think that as an adult, it's important to read middle grade fantasy just as a middle grade fantasy book. It doesn't need to, you know, be so complex and so new and so innovative and so interesting for such a wide audience. It just needs to be a book that you enjoy and that you could see a younger kid enjoying. Imagine talking with your kids and getting excited with your kids about children's fantasy and not just the old stuff. New stuff. And I know, like, these books that I'm about to talk about were published in 2000, so they're not that new, but I'm encouraging us to, like, go to the library and maybe even ask the librarian, but to go to the middle grade fantasy, juvenile fantasy, children's, whatever, and, like, pick up some books. And then, like, if you like them, buy them so that then they're in your house. So I've talked for long enough about that. But I'm just here to talk about the overall gist and the vibe of the plot of these books, talk a little bit about these books, and expect more from me when it comes to children's fantasy, because I am really passionate about this. I want to be somebody who's talking about children's fantasy online. If I want to be anything, it's somebody who's talking about that. I want to advocate for kids' stuff, kids' spaces, kids' books, all of it, okay? So today, as you already know, we are talking about the Deltora Quest Series by Emily Rada, published in 2000. The first one was published in 2000, and this is a completed 15 books. So the first two have 4 books in each. This one is 3 books, and then these are the 4 books of the last kind of little chunk of series. It's like first series, second series, third series. First series can kind of stand alone. First and second, you don't even have to read the last one, but then if you read the last one, that's the whole story. So they're very, let me show you the font, etc. Large font, big margins, and a lot of, every time I flip through, I like can't find them, but a lot of like, I always say that these books are really good for kids who haven't read very much and really like video games with like puzzles or riddles, or they just like to do that kind of thing, because this has lots of puzzles, lots of riddles. This one, it feels like a misprint or something. I don't know what's going on, but when you open it, it's like blinding. I don't know if you can tell in this light. Pure white pages, which is a little bit weird. Once again, huge margins. That was good. And then this is kind of what I was talking about, the covers. Not my favorite covers, okay? And if you get these in the, like, there's paperbacks, which is 4, you know, instead of this hardback. Really unfortunate cover art. Nothing against the artist, but there's a time and a place for kind of like what I would consider to be kind of more goofy fantasy art, and the cover of a children's book is not it, because it looks like it's trying to be, let me show one of those again, like it's trying to be like really epic, but it comes across more as like something that a kid is not going to want to be seen reading, which is not the vibe that we are going for, okay? So those are the books. As I said, there's kind of 3 series within these series, and you don't have to read all of them, but I will say this. So this is about the size of all of the books, maybe smaller, and they're called books, but I struggle. I mean, it's like part part 1 and part 2. They cannot be standalones, and they're quite small, so I would just call them parts. But one of the nice things about these, and one of the reasons why this is really great for newer readers, is that the conflict at the end, so this is like hero's journey. The conflict at the end of each one of these books, there's, you know, it's like bite-sized hero's journey, you know, and they like are going for a specific thing and they find it and then they do the bad guy, you know, they get him and then it wraps up and then it's on to the next book. And they pretty much do the whole thing over again. But the nice thing is that sometimes you're coming up on them like being face to face with a baddie and you're like, oh no, there's only 3 more pages left. It can be it gets a little bit more, like these later books are not so much like that, but the first few books are, it's like, wow, it's really fast. But you know what? Isn't that nice? Because sometimes the part of the book where I lose interest is like when they're trying to make it realistic. They don't even want to write it, but they have to make it realistic, which is like when they're meeting the big bad guy. Okay, here we go for like 50 pages. And then we have to wrap everything up after that. None of that in this. It's very to the point, and it's like, there's none of that down, you know, down part where you're like, God, what are we doing here? This is like taking forever. Very, very concise storytelling. So that's the first thing about these books. But to say a little bit about the plot, I would consider it to be kind of like Lord of the Rings for younger kids. So it's a hero's journey going to find something really important. And, you know, meeting all these beings and fighting all these bad guys and getting into all this, you know, all of these issues along the way. But the main bad guy, called the Shadow Lord in this, is very similar to Sauron. He's kind of a, like, Satan-esque being that's somewhat all-powerful and bodiless. He's, like, there, you know. Similar to that. Has a lot of little minions doing his bidding. He has a lot of plans for how to take over this world, set in a medieval type of fantasy world, so it's similar in that way as well. There is like such slight romance, you can't even barely consider that. It's enough to survive off of if you love that kind of thing. But you know, it's like, yeah, it's like Tolkien. It's like, however, this is written by a lady, so it is a little bit better than Tolkien when it comes to the writing of the ladies. But it follows three main characters, and they are the main characters through the entire series, which I love. So, just to explain a little bit about the plot of each one of these. So I will say these are not very, I mean, they've sold a lot of copies. They've been very popular. However, I am a part of 4 quite large library systems, and my in-person library that I have right now here does not have these books, like physical books. And when I look on Libby, as you can see, it's kind of, some of them will have 1 or 2, some of them have 1 or 2, and then some of them have just these 8, but nobody has more than all of that. Beside, one of them has these 8 plus a bunch of other books written by Emily Rodda. She writes a lot of children's books, not just children's fantasy, like younger children's, more contemporary type of books. I haven't read any of her other stuff. I have read some of her other children's fantasy, but I haven't read any of her other things beside that. But, so they can be a little bit harder to come by. I bought these on Amazon used, quite cheap. But if you can find them in the library, good on you. I mean, if your library only has the first 2 or the first 4 or the first 8, that's fine. Just read the first however many, you know, and if you like it, get more. If you don't, stop there. Very simple. Each one of these books, I mean, you can finish this book in like 4 to 6 hours. It does not take that. It's like very, very quick. You can read this whole thing in less than a day. In these first 8 books, the story opens up with a little bit of a history part, which is following the companion of a prince in this palace in in you know, the capital city of Deltora, which is the land that they are living in. And the king dies and the prince is crowned. And they have a belt called the Belt of Deltora, which is like a crown, which has a gemstone, like a magical gemstone from each of the 7 tribes of the country that they live in, that kind of unites and like gives them power and everything. He puts that on when he's, you know, inaugurated or whatever, and then they put that away. And something kind of tickles the companion guy. He's like, I don't know. He spends a lot of time in the library. He's looking at things. He's cross-referencing. He's finding things out. He realizes that he pretty much confirms that the kings have kind of become puppets of the royal, like, advisors, you know, the Jafar types. So he gets nervous about, like, okay, the land could fail. It could be taken down. Some baddie could come in. We are, like, really vulnerable because we are not using the power of this belt. We are not, like, utilizing. Pretty much they live in the castle. They never go out. They don't know anything that's going on out there. One day, this companion guy goes out of the castle and he sees that it's, like, ruins and poverty everywhere. Essentially, there is a fog between the castle and the city, and the people in the castle think they're seeing the city, but they're really just seeing some illusion, and then the people in the city cannot see the castle. So he ends up leaving the castle and living outside for a long time. Comes to pass that, yes, what he feared does end up happening. The advisor guy takes over. The Shadow Lord comes in. The king and his wife and unborn baby have to go into hiding. Now, then we go to 16 years later. The companion is a blacksmith in that town still, and he has a 16-year-old son. And he has forged the belt without the gemstones. The gemstones were scattered into wherever they, you know, throughout the whole land. And they're being oppressed by this Shadow Lord. He's been injured in blacksmithing somehow. So he sends his son. He says, like, you have to go and find all of the gems. Remake the belt. Find the, this is a tall order. Find the heir to the throne. And then bring them to the palace, and you know, that's gonna be it, pretty much. Like, that's gonna be enough power and enough good or whatever to get rid of the Shadow Lord. So he goes on this journey with Barda, a person in the city that he kind of knew. They go to their first destination to find the first stone. They meet a girl there who ends up, she doesn't have a family or anything, so she ends up following along with them. And everywhere they go, there's like one kind of, you know, they have the goal, which is like they know they're going to get this gem, and they can kind of guess from where. It's going to be like where the big baddie is. But they have one other kind of like sub or like side conflict that happens in each of the books. And then they get to the big baddie and they defeat the big baddie, and then they go on to the next place. So that's the story of the first 8 books. In the end, he does find the heir to the throne, and it does take the Shadow Lord back a few notches, but he's still like alive. He's not in Deltora anymore, the country, but he is in his area, which is just north. So he's not dead and gone, and he still has influence over the land, but not so much. So that's why I say it's kind of standalone, because it is pretty much a good ending to the whole thing. But wouldn't you like to see the Shadow Lord defeated for once and for all? Yeah. So then we get into the Shadowlands, which is this book. This is 3 books. This is about, there's been a lot of slaves that had been taken into the Shadowlands by the Shadow Lord, and the king wants to get them back. So our main characters go to the Shadowlands. Getting there is really hard. They finally get there. They see all of the slaves. They end up, you know, they have a coup against the Shadow Lord, and they do take him down in his own land a few more notches, potentially getting rid of him, but they're not so clear because I think she wants to kind of keep it open. But he's much less of a threat. Plus, they get rid of all of his slaves, and they thwart one of his main plans to, you know, retake over. So he's going to be having a hard time after that. Then we get into the Dragons of Deltora series, which is 4 final books. Now, I just literally yesterday looked up, and there's supposedly 3 more books that are in this world. They aren't following the same characters, and from what I could tell from the synopsis, none of the same anything. So I think it's cool that they have something, it's just she has something in the same world, but I haven't read those, and you know, I don't feel that I need to since it's a totally different story. But this is about dragons have been, you know, extinct for years and years, but there's actually one of each of the races of dragons still alive, and they have to go and like awaken them, as well as take care of this like extra plan that the Shadow Lord had, which was there's like these really evil, pretty much they're like eggs of evil. They're like the Voldemort at the end of the 7th one, you know? They're like these little things that are like gross and evil. There's one in each 4 corners of the Deltora, and they have to go and find it and kill it. And then that's like kind of the Shadow Lord's final plan, and he really didn't think that they were going to get that one. So after that, he's you know, he's gone, so he's done for. So that's, you know, pretty much no spoilers. There are some really big things that happen. There are some things that, like, other genres might not be cliche enough to do. And so that's another reason why reading children's fantasy is so nice. You know, there are some reveals that are just fire. Just great reading, you know. So I encourage everyone to pick up this book regardless of age, because that's the great thing about children's fantasy. Everyone can read it. Truly recommend to everybody. If you guys have any recommendations for middle grade fantasy that you love, that you loved, please tell me. I want to read it. I really want to. You know, I spend so much time. I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. I spend so much time at the library, and the middle grade stuff is right there. And I can't do much else. I can't leave the room or anything, and like I can't really play kitchen with 10 other little kids. So I need to be going in there and looking at books. But, you know, granted, there's 10 trillion kids' books, and it's like, well, how do I know where to start? So if you have any recommendations, please let me know. Please. Let me know what you thought if you have read this book, on the off chance that you have possibly read this book. I just love talking about it. I just love talking about it. I love reading it. I love everything. I'm very happy. If you're waiting for the Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire video, I'm sorry. Okay, if you're wondering what's she been doing, right here, baby. When you feel a need to read a certain thing, you just have to read it. If you fight it, it's like when you have a craving for a certain kind of food, you just gotta eat it. Because if you try and eat all the other stuff to satiate, it's not. You just gotta eat it. That's how I feel about this. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time.